He believed the isolation of this mountain would shield his sins. Yet he forgot who holds the keys to this kingdom. As my husband walks through the carved oak doors holding another woman's hand, he is not merely checking in. He has voluntarily stepped into a gilded cage where the judge, jury, and executioner are all the same person standing behind the desk. I will ensure this vacation is the last thing he ever enjoys as a free man. My name is Lucia Ravenscroft, and I am the invisible architect of perfection at the Ethelgard Manor. This establishment is not merely a hotel. It is a fortress of solitude and excess, perched precariously on the highest jagged peak of the Vermont mountains. To the uninitiated, it is a resort, to the fractured souls of the American elite who retreat here. It is a confessional booth upholstered in velvet and gold, where their sins are washed away by vintage champagne and the absolute guarantee of silence. Outside, the world was ending. A blizzard of biblical proportions was battering the stone walls of the manor, sealing us off from civilization. The wind howled like a dying animal, thrashing against the triple-paned reinforced glass, but inside, the silence was absolute. It was a heavy, expensive silence, smelling faintly of white tea, cedarwood, and old money. I stood in the center of the grand hall, my heels sinking imperceptibly into the Persian runner that stretched across the marble floor like a vein of dried blood. I was conducting my evening rounds, a ritual as sacred to me as prayer is to a nun. I checked the lighting first. The sconces along the eastern wall were dimmed to exactly 30%, casting long, dramatic shadows that flattered the weary faces of our guests while hiding the inevitable signs of their debauchery. I adjusted a crystal vase filled with winter orchids on the central console table, turning it 3 degrees to the right so that the bloom faced the entrance perfectly. Perfection is not an accident. It is a discipline. It is a weapon. In my role as the senior general manager, I wielded that weapon with a surgical precision that terrified my staff and comforted my guests. They did not know who I really was, or the extent of the family legacy that built these walls. To them, I was just the woman in the black suit who made problems disappear. My mind, however, was drifting 2,000 miles away. It was wandering to Seattle, where the rain falls in gray sheets, and where my husband, Julian, was currently pitching to a group of venture capitalists, or so I believed. We had been married for 5 years. 5 years of what I thought was a partnership of equals. Julian Thorne was the charming, ambitious financial director who had swept me off my feet with his intellect and his apparent dedication to building a future together. He had kissed me goodbye 3 days ago at the airport, complaining about the damp Pacific Northwest weather and the stress of raising capital for his firm. I remembered the warmth of his hand on my cheek, the sincerity in his eyes when he promised to call me as soon as he landed back on the East Coast. I missed him. The ache was a dull, constant thrum beneath my ribs, a vulnerability I allowed myself only in the privacy of my own thoughts. The sound of a heavy engine growling outside the main entrance snapped me back to the present. The headlights of a vehicle cut through the swirling white chaos of the storm, illuminating the falling snow like diamonds caught in a spotlight. It was a stretch limousine, jet black, moving with the sluggish arrogance of a predator that knows it has no natural enemies. I frowned. We had no scheduled arrivals for the rest of the evening. The storm had grounded all flights and closed the mountain passes hours ago. Whoever this was had either bribed the highway patrol or was foolish enough to risk death for a night of luxury. I signaled to the bellman, a young man named Thomas, who immediately straightened his spine and rushed to the heavy oak doors. The doors swung open, letting in a blast of freezing air that danced across the heated floor. Thomas hurried out with a massive umbrella, fighting the wind to shield the guests. First, a pair of polished Italian leather loafers hit the pavement. Then, a man emerged, shaking the snow from a cashmere coat that I recognized instantly. It was charcoal gray, bespoke, with a subtle herringbone pattern. I had bought it for Julian for his 32nd birthday. My breath hitched in my throat, a tiny, jagged intake of air that felt like swallowing glass. It was Julian. Relief flooded me for exactly 1 second. He was home early. He had surprised me. He had braved the storm to come to the manor, to surprise his hard-working wife for a romantic weekend. My heart leaped, ready to abandon all professional protocol and run to him. Then, he turned back toward the open door of the limousine. He extended a hand, palm up, a gesture of solicitous tenderness that I knew intimately. He was not reaching for a briefcase. A woman's hand, delicate and manicured with long red nails, slipped into his. A leg clad in sheer stockings stepped out, followed by a figure wrapped in a white fox fur coat that cost more than the average American earns in a year. She was young, painfully, undeniably young. Her hair was a cascading river of blonde waves that caught the light of the lobby chandelier, and her laugh, high and tinkling, pierced the solemn atmosphere of the hall. The world did not spin. It did not go black. Instead, everything sharpened. The resolution of my vision increased to a level that was excruciating. I saw the way Julian smiled at her. It was not the tired, comfortable smile of a husband of 5 years. It was the hungry, dazzling smile of a conqueror. A look he used to give me when we first met. He leaned in close to her ear to whisper something, his lips brushing against a lock of her hair, and she giggled, leaning her weight against him as if she were too fragile to stand on her own. My heart stopped beating. I mean that literally. For a terrifying, suspended moment, the organ in my chest ceased its function. My blood turned to ice water. A high-pitched, ringing noise, like a siren from a distant nightmare, filled my ears, drowning out the ambient jazz playing softly from the hidden speakers. My stomach lurched violently, and bile rose in my throat, acidic and burning, but I did not fall. I did not scream. I did not faint. 100 years of instinct, or perhaps just the 34 years of discipline that had been beaten into me by my lineage, took over. My spine, which felt as if it had been shattered, straightened automatically. My face, which wanted to contort in agony, smoothed itself into a mask of terrifying neutrality. The general manager murdered the wife in less than a second. The wife was dead. Her corpse left bleeding on the floor of my mind. The general manager was the only one left standing. I watched them walk toward the reception desk. They were a caricature of illicit romance. The girl, Sienna, I would later learn her name was, clung to his arm, looking around the lobby with wide, greedy eyes. She touched the gold leaf on the pillar as they passed, her expression one of awe and entitlement. Julian was too busy playing the gallant protector to notice anything else. He was looking at her, not at the hotel. He was so consumed by his own arrogance, so drunk on the thrill of his transgression, that he did not even think to look at the staff. To him, the people who worked here were not human beings. We were furniture. We were automatons designed to serve his whims. He assumed his wife was safe in her office on the top floor, or perhaps he thought I was away at the city property, or worse, he simply did not care enough to check. The receptionist on duty, a capable woman named Claire, looked up with a polite smile, ready to greet them. I moved. I did not run. I glided. My movements were fluid and silent, a ghost drifting across the marble. I approached the reception desk from the side, effectively invisible to the couple who were now leaning against the high counter, giggling about the cold. "It is like a castle, Julian," the girl cooed, her voice grating against my nerves like sandpaper. "You really are a prince. Anything for you." "Babe," Julian replied, his voice, that voice that had whispered vows to me in a cathedral, that voice that had promised to love me until death parted us. "I told you I would take you somewhere where no one could find us." The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. I reached the space behind the desk. Claire saw me coming. She saw the look in my eyes. It was not anger. Anger is hot. Anger is messy. What Claire saw in my eyes was the absolute zero of space. She opened her mouth to speak, but I silenced her with a single, sharp gesture of my hand. I pointed to the back office. Claire, sensing the radiation of pure danger emanating from me, stepped back instantly, abandoning her post without a word. I stepped into her place. I placed my hands on the cool granite of the counter. I could feel the vibrations of their laughter through the stone. I looked down at the computer terminal, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I did not need to look up yet. I wanted to savor this. I wanted to give him one last second of happiness before I destroyed his world. "Checking in?" I asked. My voice was calm. It was the voice of the manor itself, smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. Julian was busy trying to extract his platinum credit card from his wallet. He did not look up. He was too busy impressing his mistress with his nonchalance. "Yes," he said, tossing the card onto the counter with a practiced flick of his wrist. "Reservation for Thorne, one of your best suites. And make sure we are not disturbed. We have had a long journey." Sienna was busy inspecting her reflection in a decorative mirror on the counter, fluffing her fur coat. Neither of them looked at the face of the servant. Why would they? "Certainly," I said, typing nothing. "Mr. Julian Thorne, and the guest accompanying you?" "Miss Vane," Julian said impatiently, tapping his fingers on the marble. "Come on, chop chop. We want to get to the room." "I apologize for the delay," I said, pitching my voice just a fraction lower, dropping the generic service tone and allowing the familiar timbre of my natural voice to bleed through. "We pride ourselves on attention to detail here at Ethelgard." Something in my tone, perhaps a frequency only a guilty conscience can hear, made him pause. His tapping finger froze in midair. The confident set of his shoulders stiffened. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he lifted his head. He looked past the computer screen. He looked past the vase of orchids. He looked into my eyes. For a moment, he did not understand what he was seeing. His brain could not compute the data. It was a glitch in his reality. He was seeing his wife, the woman he thought was waiting for his call in their penthouse, standing behind the reception desk of a hotel in the middle of a blizzard in Vermont. Then, the realization hit him like a physical blow. I watched the color drain from his face. It started at his lips, turning them a pasty gray, and washed up to his hairline. His eyes went wide, the pupils dilating in sheer primal terror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was a silent scream. The hand that had been resting possessively on Sienna's waist went limp and fell to his side as if the nerves had been severed. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The powerful executive, the prince in his castle, evaporated. All that was left was a cheating husband caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. Sienna, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, stopped preening. She looked from Julian to me, confused. "Julian, what is wrong? Do you know her?" I did not blink. I did not break eye contact with him. I held his gaze, pinning him to the spot like a butterfly mounted on a board. I let the silence stretch. Filling the massive hall, heavy and suffocating, I let him sweat. I let him suffocate in his own panic. I picked up the platinum card he had tossed on the counter. I held it between two fingers, flipping it over casually. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne," I said. My voice was soft, courteous, and laced with enough venom to kill a grown man. I smiled. It was the smile of a predator that has just realized the cage door is locked and the prey is trapped inside with it. "Welcome to Ethelgard," I continued, sliding the card into the reader with a definitive click. "Hope you enjoy your stay, sir." The platinum card hit the marble countertop with a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the cavernous silence of the lobby. It spun on the polished stone, a dizzying blur of silver. Before coming to rest near my hand, Julian did not move to retrieve it. His hand remained suspended in the air, trembling with a frequency so subtle that only a wife or a sniper would notice. He looked as though he had been struck by lightning, but was forbidden from falling down. The color had not just drained from his face, it had been forcibly evicted, leaving him with the pallor of wet ash. Beside him, Sienna shifted her weight from one hip to the other. She frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows knitting together in confusion. She looked at the card, then at Julian, and finally at me. She was trying to piece together the scene, but she lacked the cipher. To her, this was just a clumsy moment, a dropped credit card, a clumsy husband. She did not see the invisible guillotine blade hanging inches above Julian's neck. "Julian?" she asked, her voice tinged with a slight whine. "Pick it up. You are embarrassing me." He did not hear her. He was trapped in a private hell. Staring into the abyss of my eyes, he was waiting for me to scream, to lunge across the counter, to slap him. He was waiting for the explosion. But I gave him nothing. I gave him the vacuum of space. I picked up the card myself, my movements deliberate and terrifyingly calm. I held it by the corner, as if it were a piece of contaminated evidence. "I will need identification from both of you," I said. My voice was not the voice of Lucia Ravenscroft, the woman who had cried in his arms when her mother died. It was the voice of the Athelgard Manor. It was a voice of protocols, rules, and absolute detachment. Passport or driver's license. It is hotel policy for all check-ins, regardless of status. Julian swallowed. The sound was audible in the quiet lobby. His eyes darted frantically to the side, checking if Sienna was looking, before returning to me. He leaned in, just an inch, invading the sterile space between guest and manager. "Lucia," he breathed. It was barely a whisper, a desperate exhalation of air. "Please, not now, not like this." I did not blink. I did not acknowledge his plea. I simply stared at the bridge of his nose, my expression as blank as a fresh sheet of paper. "Identification, sir," I repeated. "And for the lady as well. We cannot process the room key without it." He looked as if I had physically struck him. The realization was dawning on him that there would be no scene. There would be no emotional release. I was denying him the comfort of a fight. I was treating him exactly as he appeared to be. A stranger, a customer, a transaction. With shaking fingers, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He fumbled for his wallet. His coordination shattered. He pulled out his driver's license, the one with the photo taken 3 years ago. The day we renewed our vows, where he was smiling that charming, boyish smile. He placed it on the counter. I took it. I looked at the face in the plastic laminate, then at the man standing before me. The man in the photo was a lie. The man in front of me was a ruin. "And yours, miss?" I asked, shifting my gaze to Sienna. She bristled. She was not used to being commanded. She was used to being courted. She let out a dramatic sigh. Unzipping her designer handbag with aggressive force, she tossed her license onto the counter, not handing it to me, but letting it slide toward me. It was a petty power move. I let it slide. "Sienna Vane," I read the name aloud, testing the taste of it on my tongue. It tasted like cheap candy wrapped in expensive foil. "Thank you, Miss Vane." I began to type. I was not typing anything meaningful. Of course, I was simply creating noise. The rhythmic clatter of the mechanical keys was a form of psychological torture. Every keystroke was a hammer driving a nail into Julian's coffin. I could see him flinching with every click. "Is there a problem?" Sienna asked sharply. She sensed the tension now. The air was thick with it, heavy and static. She looked at Julian, seeing the sweat beading on his upper lip despite the freezing draft from the door. "Julian, why is she looking at us like that? Do you know her?" Julian opened his mouth, but his voice failed him. He coughed, a dry, hacking sound. "No," he croaked. "No, I do not. She is just doing her job, right?" He looked at me, begging me to validate his lie. He was asking his wife to help him cheat on her. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was almost impressive in its moral bankruptcy. I stopped typing. I looked up slowly. "I am the senior general manager of this establishment, Miss Vane," I said, my voice smooth as silk wrapped around a razor blade. "I take a personal interest in all our VIP guests, especially those who travel such a long way in such difficult weather," Sienna scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest, the fur coat bunched up around her neck. "Well, your manner is a little intense. We are tired. We want our room. We booked the deluxe king suite." I smiled. It was a smile that did not reach my eyes. It was a baring of teeth. "Actually," I said, my gaze sliding back to Julian, locking onto his panic, "I see here that we have a special availability tonight. Due to the storm, we have had a cancellation. I am going to upgrade you." Julian shook his head slightly, a micro-movement of no. He wanted to be hidden. He wanted a standard room in the back. He wanted to disappear. "I have placed you in the Raven Suite," I announced. Julian flinched. He knew that name. I had told him about it years ago, when the manor was being renovated. It was the penthouse. It was the highest point of the hotel. A glass-walled sanctuary suspended over the cliff edge. It was completely isolated. There were no neighbors. It was a fishbowl in the sky. "The Raven Suite?" Sienna's eyes lit up. Her annoyance vanished, replaced by greed. "Is that the big one? The one on the website with the jacuzzi on the balcony?" "The very same," I said. "It is our most exclusive accommodation, private elevator access, panoramic views of the mountains, soundproofed walls. Once you are up there, you will feel like you are the only two people on Earth. No one can hear you. No one can reach you." I let the threat hang in the air. "No one can hear you scream." "That sounds perfect," Sienna squealed, clapping her hands. She turned to Julian, beaming. "See? I told you this trip would be magical. You are amazing." Julian looked like he was about to vomit. He gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself. I looked down at the computer screen again, though it was blank. "And I see here," I continued, my voice raising slightly to ensure clear enunciation, "that you noted a special occasion on your reservation request." Julian closed his eyes. "A second anniversary," I read aloud. "How lovely." The silence that followed was absolute. 5 years. We had been married for 5 years. 2 years. He had been with her for 2 years. I did not need to do the math. The equation was burned into my brain instantly. For 2 years, 40% of our marriage, he had been building a parallel life. While we were planning our summer vacations, he was with her. While I was nursing him through the flu last winter, he was texting her. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. It was the death of the last shred of empathy I held for him. If he had picked her up in a bar last week, perhaps it would be a tragedy. But 2 years? 2 years was not a mistake. 2 years was a campaign. 2 years was a war. 2 years, Sienna confirmed proudly, leaning against Julian's rigid arm. "Though it feels like forever, does it not, baby?" "Yes," I said, answering for him. "I am sure it does." I picked up the credit card again. "I will need to pre-authorize the incidental charges. The deposit for the Raven Suite is $5,000. Julian's eyes snapped open. He knew the limit on his personal card. He knew he was overextended. He had been moving money around, hiding assets, playing a shell game that I was only just beginning to understand. "Use the other one," he whispered hoarsely. "I beg your pardon?" I asked, leaning in. "I did not catch that. Sir," he gritted his teeth. "The card on file. Use the card on file." I swiped the platinum card. The system brought up the details. I stared at the screen. Corporate card. Ravenscroft Holdings. Authorized user. Julian Thorne. He was paying for his mistress's hotel room, in my hotel, using my family's money. The sheer, unadulterated insult of it almost made me laugh. It was so grotesque it was absurd. He was not just cheating on me, he was funding his betrayal with my inheritance. He was using the Ravenscroft fortune to humiliate a Ravenscroft. "Authorized," I said. The word sounded like a gavel striking wood. I reached under the counter and produced 2 key cards. They were black, heavy, and cold to the touch. I placed them on the marble and slid them across the divide. "You are all set, Mr. Thorne," I said. "The elevator to the Raven Suite is at the end of the east corridor. It requires a key scan to open. As I said, total privacy." Julian reached for the keys. His hand brushed against mine. His skin was clammy and cold. He pulled back as if he had been burned. "Thank you," he managed to choke out. "Oh, and Mr. Thorne?" I called out, just as he turned to leave. He froze. He did not turn around. He just stood there, his back rigid, waiting for the blow. "I will personally ensure that your stay is memorable," I said. "We have a very dedicated team here. We do not miss a single detail. Not one." He nodded. A jerky, spasmodic motion. And then he began to walk. He walked like a man marching to the gallows. Sienna was chattering beside him, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor, oblivious to the fact that she was walking beside a corpse. She linked her arm through his, pulling him close, but he was stiff, unyielding. They reached the far end of the lobby, near the gilded elevator doors. Sienna pressed the button. Just before the doors slid open, Julian turned. He looked back across the expanse of the grand hall. The distance between us was perhaps 50 yards, but it felt like an ocean. He looked at me standing there in my severe black suit, framed by the dark wood and the winter orchids. His eyes were wide, dark pits of despair. He looked at me the way a sinner looks at the gates of hell as they swing shut. He wanted to run back. He wanted to explain. He wanted to beg. But he was trapped by the very lie he had constructed. He had to get on that elevator. He had to play the role of the loving boyfriend, or his entire world would collapse right there in the lobby. I did not wave. I did not frown. I simply watched. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Sienna pulled him inside. The last thing I saw before the metal doors slid shut was his face, pale and haunted, disappearing into the box. The doors closed. The numbers above the elevator began to climb. 1, 2, 3. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind howl outside. The storm was getting worse. Good. No one would be leaving tonight. I turned my head slightly to the left, where my assistant manager, a sharp young man named David, had been hovering in the shadows, witnessing the entire exchange with wide eyes. He knew something was wrong, but he did not know what. "David," I said. My voice was back to its professional cadence, but there was a new undertone, a hardness that had not been there 10 minutes ago. "Yes, Mrs. Ravenscroft," he answered, stepping forward immediately. "That's sweet," I said, nodding toward the elevator. "Room 801, the Raven Suite?" "Yes, ma'am." "Initiate a strict do not disturb protocol," I ordered. "I want all external calls to that room blocked. If anyone calls asking for a Mr. Thorne, tell them he is not registered. If he tries to call out, the lines are to be busy. Is that clear?" David hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was an unusual request. Illegal, perhaps, in some contexts, but he looked at my face, and he saw the steel behind my eyes. He nodded. "Crystal clear, ma'am." "And David?" "Yes?" "Go to the archives. Access the secure server. I want you to print out the full financial transaction history for the Ravenscroft Holdings corporate account ending in 4099. I want every expense, every withdrawal, every coffee and flight ticket for the last 24 months. Right now?" David asked. "Right now," I replied, turning back to my computer. "And bring it to my office. I have some accounting to do." I looked at the empty lobby. The space where Julian had stood was empty now, but the stench of his betrayal lingered. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. The shock was fading, receding like the tide, and in its place, a cold, hard rage was beginning to solidify. It was a useful emotion. Grief makes you weak. Rage makes you efficient. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for security. "This is Ravenscroft," I said when the head of security answered. "We have a code gray in the Raven Suite. Monitor all movement. I want to know every time that door opens. I want to know every time he takes a breath." I hung up the phone. The game had begun. He thought he had checked into a hotel. He was wrong. He had checked into a correction facility, and the warden was awake. The elevator ride to the top floor of the Ethelgard Manor usually took exactly 45 seconds. Tonight, it felt like an eternity suspended in a vacuum. As the numbers climbed, leaving the lobby and the filth of my husband's betrayal far below, I stared at my reflection in the polished brass doors. The woman staring back at me was impeccable. Her hair was a sleek helmet of darkness. Her suit was unwrinkled, and her posture was rigid. She looked like a CEO. She looked like a queen. She did not look like a wife whose heart had just been ripped out of her chest and stomped on by Italian leather loafers. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing my sanctuary. My office was a glass box perched at the very pinnacle of the resort, a terrifying eagle's nest that offered a 360-degree view of the freezing hellscape outside. The storm was raging against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a white maelstrom of violence that mirrored the chaos erupting in my blood. I stepped inside, and the heavy glass door hissed shut behind me, sealing the room. I walked to the heavy mahogany desk, the only piece of wood in a room of chrome and glass, and turned the lock. Then, and only then, did I allow the human being to surface. I did not scream. Screaming is for people who believe someone is listening, and I knew better. Instead, I sank to my knees. The carpet was plush, absorbing the impact as my legs simply refused to hold me up any longer. My hands gripped the edge of the desk so hard, my knuckles turned the color of bone. A violent shudder started in my core, a tectonic shift of pure, unadulterated shock. My stomach contracted, a spasm of physical rejection, and I dry heaved, my body trying to expel the toxicity of the last 10 minutes. There was nothing to purge but bile and bitterness. I gasped for air. The sound loud and ragged in the silent room. I shook uncontrollably, my teeth chattering not from cold, but from the adrenaline overdose flooding my system. I looked at the Patek Philippe watch on my wrist. I gave myself 5 minutes. That was the deal. I could be a broken woman for 300 seconds. I could be the pathetic, duped wife for exactly 5 minutes. As the second hand swept around the dial, the memories began to bombard me, no longer filtered by love or trust. They hit me like shrapnel. I remembered the nights he came home late, smelling of a perfume that was too floral, too sweet. He had told me it was the cleaning spray used in the office building. I had believed him. I remembered the business trip to Chicago last October, the one where he could not FaceTime me because the hotel Wi-Fi was supposedly down. A luxury hotel in downtown Chicago with no internet? I had believed him. I remembered the way he had pulled away from me in bed for the last 6 months, claiming the pressure of the upcoming merger was killing his libido. He had said he was too stressed, too tired, too anxious to be intimate. He had made me feel guilty for wanting him, made me feel selfish for needing my husband. He was not stressed. He was satiated. He was spending his energy, his passion, and his body on Sienna Vane. The second hand hit the 12. 5 minutes were up. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of water from a crystal carafe. I drank it in one long swallow, washing away the taste of bile. The shaking stopped. The ice was back. I sat down in my leather executive chair and woke up my command center. 3 large monitors hummed to life. With a few keystrokes, I pulled up the security grid. I did not need audio. I knew the language of the body better than any spoken dialect. I located the feed for the corridor outside the Raven suite. They were there. Julian was fumbling with the key card, his hands clearly shaking. Sienna was standing behind him, spinning in a slow circle, admiring the architecture. She looked like a child in a toy store where everything was free. Then, I saw it. It was a detail so small, so insignificant to anyone else, but to me, it was a declaration of war. Sienna was unwinding the scarf from her neck. It was a distinctive piece, a rare weave of vicuna wool dyed a deep, twilight blue with silver threading. I recognized it immediately. I had held that exact scarf in my hands at a boutique in Milan 2 years ago. I had wanted it. I had admired the craftsmanship. But Julian had gently taken it from my hands, guiding me away, whispering that it was absurdly overpriced, that it was wasteful, that we should be prudent with our liquidity while the market was volatile. He had shamed me for wanting something beautiful, and now, that very scarf was draped around the neck of his 20-something mistress. He had not just bought it for her, he had denied me to give to her. He had taken a piece of my desire and gifted it to the woman who was helping him destroy me. That was the moment the grief died. Grief requires love, and in that second, looking at that vicuna scarf, my love for Julian Thorne evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. My personal cell phone, which I had left on the desk, began to vibrate. The screen lit up. The name My Love flashed in bright, mocking letters. He was calling me. He was likely hiding in the bathroom of the Raven suite, sitting on the heated marble floor, calling his wife to tell her he had landed safely in Seattle and was heading to his hotel. He was going to lie to me, right now, while standing under my roof, while sleeping in my bed. I stared at the phone. I imagined his voice, breathless and fake, spinning the web he had been weaving for 2 years. I did not decline the call. That would send a signal. I simply held the power button down. I watched the screen fade to black. I watched the words, My Love, disappear into the void. I tossed the phone into the drawer and locked it. Lucia, the wife, was unavailable. She no longer existed. I turned back to the monitors. It was time to see just how deep the rot went. I opened the secure financial gateway. As the owner of the hotel and the primary shareholder of our family trust, I had God-level access to everything. Julian was the financial director. Yes, but he served at the pleasure of the board, and I was the board. I navigated to the corporate expense accounts. I pulled up the transaction history for the card he had just used. It was a bloodbath. The $5,000 for the room tonight was a drop in the ocean. I scrolled back through the last 18 months, and the pattern emerged with sickening clarity. Flights to the Maldives booked as networking retreats. Jewelry purchases from Cartier listed as client appreciation gifts. Dinners at 3-star Michelin restaurants categorized as investor meetings. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just the corporate credit card. There were wire transfers, large ones. I opened the portfolio for the Ravenscroft Venture Capital Fund, the legacy fund my father had established before he died. It was meant to be a nest egg, a fortress of capital to be used for expansion and charitable works. It was the sacred heart of my family's financial power. There were 6 transfers in the last 6 months. Each one was for exactly $490,000, just under the $500,000 threshold that required dual signature authorization. Total amount missing, nearly $3 million. He was not just having an affair. He was embezzling. He was stripping the copper from the walls of the house I had built. He was stealing my father's legacy to build a golden parachute for himself and his little blonde accessory. I clicked on the recipient details for the transfers. They went to a shell company called J.S. Holdings LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands, J&S, Julian and Sienna. He was not even creative. He was arrogant. He thought I was just the pretty face who managed the hospitality side while the men handled the money. He thought I was stupid. I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. It was a terrifying sensation. I picked up the secure landline on my desk. I did not dial the police. Not yet. The police are a blunt instrument, and I needed a scalpel. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It belonged to Marcus Vance. Marcus was a shark in a suit, a litigator who operated out of a steel tower in Manhattan and terrified judges just by walking into a courtroom. He had been my father's fixer, and he had always looked at Julian with a suspicion I had dismissed as paranoia. Vance, a voice answered on the first ring. It was rough, alert, and devoid of pleasantries. Marcus, I said. My voice was steady, resonating with the acoustic perfection of the glass room. It is Lucia. Lucia. His tone shifted instantly, sharpening. It is 10 o'clock at night. You never call unless a building is burning down. The building is fine, I said, staring at the screen where Julian was now pouring champagne for Sienna. But the foundation is rotten. Talk to me. Julian is here, at Ethelgard. I thought he was in Seattle. So did I. He is here with a woman. Her name is Sienna Vane, but that is the least of it. Marcus, I am looking at the venture fund ledgers. There was a silence on the other end, the kind of silence where a brilliant mind is processing catastrophe. How much? Marcus asked. 3 million. So far, funneled into an offshore LLC. Jesus, Marcus breathed. Lucia, listen to me. Do not confront him. Do not let him know you know. If he gets spooked, he will move the rest of the assets before we can freeze them. He is not going anywhere. Marcus, I said, looking out at the white wall of snow battering the glass. We are in the middle of the storm of the century. The roads are closed. The passes are blocked. He is trapped in a glass jar. And I have the lid. I can have a forensic accountant team remote into your server in 10 minutes, Marcus said. The sounds of him moving, likely getting dressed, coming through the line. I will have the divorce papers drafted by morning, but for the embezzlement, we need airtight proof. We need to nail him so hard he never sees sunlight again. I will get you the proof, I promised. I have total surveillance on his room. I will give you everything, his conversations, his digital footprint, his soul. Lucia, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a serious, warning register. Be careful, a man like that. A man who has been living a double life for that long when he is cornered. He will be dangerous. He has nothing to lose. He has everything to lose. Marcus, I corrected him. He just does not know it yet. Get the team started. I want his assets frozen by sunrise. I want his credit cards to turn into plastic scrap. I want him to wake up tomorrow morning as a pauper. Consider it done. I am heading to the airfield. If the storm breaks, I will be there by noon tomorrow. Good. I hung up the phone. The silence returned. But it no longer felt heavy. It felt charged with potential energy. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling mirror near the wardrobe. I looked at myself. The shock was gone. The nausea was gone. The woman in the mirror was pale. Yes, but her eyes were burning with a cold blue fire. I reached into my purse and pulled out my lipstick. It was a deep, blood-red shade called Vendetta. I uncapped it and leaned toward the glass. My hand was steady as a surgeon's as I applied the color. I traced the curve of my lips, redefining the mouth that had kissed a liar for 5 years. I blotted my lips. I adjusted the collar of my blazer. You are not a victim, I whispered to the reflection. The words bounced off the glass, surrounding me. You are a Ravenscroft. This is your mountain. This is your manor. I looked at the monitor one last time. Julian was raising a glass of my vintage champagne to toast his mistress. He looked happy. He looked triumphant. Drink up, darling, I said to the screen. It is the last drink you will ever taste as a free man. I turned away from the mirror. I was no longer the prey. I was the hunter, and the hunt had just begun. The glow of the 3 high-definition monitors bathed my face in a spectral blue light, casting the rest of the office into deep shadow. I was no longer a wife grieving a marriage. I was an analyst dissecting a catastrophe. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacking the only sound in the room other than the relentless drumming of the blizzard against the glass. I accessed the central security mainframe. It was a system I had helped design, a panopticon of digital surveillance intended to protect our high-profile guests from paparazzi and stalkers. Tonight, however, I was turning its unblinking eye inward. I typed in my personal override code, a string of characters known only to me and the system architect. Protocol, Black Watch, Target, Suite 801, the Raven Suite, Authorization L. Ravenscroft. The screen flashed red for a microsecond before settling into a cold, clinical green. I had just activated the highest level of monitoring available legally, and perhaps slightly beyond the boundaries of standard privacy laws, justified under the ironclad Security Risk Assessment Clause in our Terms of Service. By flagging Julian as a potential threat to the hotel's assets, which, given his embezzlement, was technically true, I granted myself total access. A new window popped up, cascading data in real time. I could see the keycard logs. I could see the room temperature adjustments. I could see the volume level of the television. I could even see the minibar sensors triggering as they pulled out a bottle of vodka. Then, the internal communication log blinked. Active call. Suite 801 to front desk. I did not hesitate. I routed the audio stream directly to my headset. I did not need to speak. I only needed to listen. I pressed the monitor button, effectively becoming a ghost on the line. Front desk. This is Sarah speaking. The night receptionist answered, her voice bright and professional. Yes. Hello. Julian's voice came through the headphones. It sounded thin, strained, the voice of a man trying to hold up a collapsing ceiling with one hand. This is Mr. Thorne in the Raven Suite. I had a question about the management. Certainly, sir. How can I help? The woman who checked us in, Julian stammered. Mrs. Ravenscroft? Is she the only manager on duty tonight? Yes, sir. Mrs. Ravenscroft is the senior general manager. She is overseeing operations during the storm. Would you like me to connect you to her office? No, Julian shouted, the panic spiking in his voice so sharply it caused audio feedback in my ear. He immediately lowered his voice, likely realizing Sienna was in the room. No, do not contact me. I just wanted to know if she stays at the hotel overnight. Or if she goes home. Mrs. Ravenscroft has a private residence on the property. Sir, she is usually here 24/7 during severe weather events. There was a long pause. I could hear Julian's breathing, rapid and shallow. Thank you, he whispered, and the line went dead. I sat back, a grim smile touching my lips. He was terrified. He was trying to calculate the odds of running into me again, through the audio sensors in the room, ostensibly for voice-activated concierge services, but currently serving a much darker purpose. I heard him drop the handset back onto the cradle. Who was that? Baby? Sienna's voice drifted in. She sounded bored, likely flipping through channels on the television. Just the front desk, Julian lied. I could hear the rustle of fabric as he moved, probably pacing the room. I was complaining about the draft. You look so weird downstairs, Sienna said. With that woman, the manager, you looked like you saw a ghost. It is complicated, Julian sighed. Look, I did not want to tell you this because I did not want to ruin the vibe, but I know her. My fingers froze over the keyboard. You know her? Sienna asked. How? She is an ex, Julian said. I felt a surge of indignation so hot it almost seared my skin. An ex? We dated years ago, Julian continued, spinning his fabrication with sickening ease. Before I met you, she was intense, obsessive. Actually, she could not let go when I broke it off. I had no idea she was working here. If I had known, I never would have booked this place. Oh my God, Sienna gasped. Is she, like, a stalker? Kind of, Julian said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She is unstable, Sienna. That is why she was staring at us. She is jealous. She sees me with someone as beautiful as you, someone young and vibrant, and it kills her. She is just a bitter, lonely woman who is still in love with me. Ew, Sienna laughed. That is so creepy. Do not worry, baby. I will protect you from the scary old lady. I slowly removed the headset and placed it on the desk. The silence in my office was deafening, bitter, lonely, unstable. He had taken the reality of our marriage, my support, my love, my patience, and twisted it into a caricature to feed the ego of a 22-year-old girl. He had not only stolen my money, he was stealing my dignity. He was rewriting our history to make himself the victim of my obsession. Project Icarus, I said aloud to the empty room. Let us see how high you have flown. I opened a new secure folder on the server and named it Project Icarus. I switched windows to the financial forensic tools. I had the transaction history from the corporate card, but now I dug deeper. I accessed the metadata of every purchase, cross-referencing it with his calendar and the GPS data from his company phone, which was also billed to the firm. The screen filled with lines of data. A cascading waterfall of evidence. Item 1. Emirates Airlines. First class. JFK to Dubai. Date: November 12th. 24. Cost: $14,000. Julian's calendar. Tech Summit in San Francisco. Notes: 2 tickets booked. Passenger names: Julian Thorne and Sienna Vane. Item 2. The Four Seasons Maldives at Landa Giravaru. Date: January 10th. 25. Cost: $38,000. Julian's calendar. Networking retreat with Asian investors. Notes: 7 nights in the Sunset Water Villa. The exact villa I had shown him in a brochure 3 years ago, telling him it was my dream vacation spot. He had taken her to my dream. Item 3. Tiffany & Co. Fifth Avenue. Date: February 14th. 25. Valentine's Day. Cost: $12,500. Item: platinum diamond tennis bracelet. I looked down at my own wrist. On that Valentine's Day, he had given me a card and a box of chocolates picked up from a drugstore, claiming money was tight because of the market downturn. I scrolled faster. The numbers blurred, but the total kept rising. Designer handbags, spa treatments, Michelin star dinners, a lease on a Porsche Macan in her name. It was endless. I ran a summation query. Total unauthorized expenditure: 18 months, $2,143,982.50. This was not just a marital betrayal. This was grand larceny. This was corporate fraud. This was a federal crime. He had not just dipped his hand into the cookie jar, he had smashed the jar and sold the glass shards. I took screenshots of everything. I downloaded the PDFs of the receipts. I exported the GPS logs proving he was in the Maldives, not San Francisco. I compiled it all into the Icarus folder. Every file was a nail in his coffin. Then, I saw the most recent charge. Pending. Merchant, Zenith Revolving Restaurant, the Ethelgard Manor. Date: tomorrow, January 27th. Service: the Eternal Love, private dining package. Special requests: will you marry me? Written in chocolate on the dessert plate. I stared at the screen. The air left my lungs. He was going to propose. He was going to propose to her. Tomorrow night, in my hotel, at the restaurant I built, paid for with my money. The audacity was so absolute, so pure in its narcissism, that it transcended anger and became something almost like awe. He really believed he was untouchable. He believed I was so stupid, so blind, that he could orchestrate his new life right under my nose. He wanted a new beginning? I would give him an ending. I picked up my encrypted cell phone. I typed a message to Marcus Vance. My fingers were steady, hitting the keys with precision. 2. Marcus Vance. Message: evidence secured. Total embezzlement exceeds $2 million over 18 months. He is planning to propose to her tomorrow night at the Zenith. I want the papers ready. Not just divorce. I want criminal charges drafted. Fraud, embezzlement, misappropriation of funds. Prepare a writ of attachment for all his personal assets. I hit send. A moment later, Marcus replied. From Marcus Vance. Message: received. My team is on it. We are contacting the district attorney regarding the fraud. The sum is large enough for immediate arrest warrants. Do you want to wait until they leave the property? I typed back instantly. 2. Marcus Vance. Message: no, I want him served here. I want the warrants executed in the lobby. I want him to leave this mountain in handcuffs. I set the phone down. Suddenly, a notification popped up from the valet desk system. Guest request. Vehicle retrieval. Room 801. I frowned. He was trying to leave? Now? I clicked the intercom to the valet station. Report, I commanded. Mrs. Ravenscroft, the valet answered, breathless. Mr. Thorne in 801 just called. He is demanding his car. He says there's a family emergency and they need to leave immediately. He was running. The encounter in the lobby had spooked him more than I thought. The obsessed ex story might have worked on Sienna, but deep down, Julian knew he was in danger. His survival instinct was kicking in. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him the truth. Ma'am, the plows have not come through yet. The access road is under 4 feet of snow. Visibility is 0. The sheriff has closed the highway. And his reaction? He shouted at me. He offered me $500 cash to bring the car around anyway. Deny the request, I said coolly. Cite the liability clause. Tell him that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor, no vehicles are permitted to leave the property until the storm clears. If he persists, tell him he is welcome to walk. Understood, ma'am. I leaned back in my chair, watching the security feed. In the Raven suite, Julian was pacing frantically by the window, phone to his ear, looking out at the swirling white darkness. He was looking for a way out, but there was no way out. The Ethelgard Manor was built on a precipice. The only road in was buried. The helicopter pad was iced over. He was not just a guest. He was a prisoner. You are not going anywhere. Julian, I whispered to the screen, you stepped into the spider web. Now you have to wait for the spider. I watched him throw his phone onto the sofa in frustration. He turned to Sienna, likely telling her another lie about why they had to stay. He was trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, with the woman he was paying for. Using the money he had stolen from the woman who was watching him. The storm outside howled, a symphony of wind and ice, but inside my office, it was quiet. It was the quiet of a courtroom before the verdict is read. I closed the financial window and opened the hotel's event management system. I navigated to the reservation for the Zenith restaurant for tomorrow night. Reservation. Thorn. Table. 1. The window seat. Status. Confirmed. I clicked on the notes section. I typed a new instruction for the maitre d'. Instruction. Upgrade to the Judas menu. Ensure the wine list includes the vintage he saved for our 10th anniversary. I will be personally overseeing the service. I saved the changes. The trap was not just set, it was baited, and the prey was already chewing on the wire. I turned off the monitors, plunging the room back into darkness. Save for the lights of the storm, I did not need to see anymore. I knew exactly where he was. He was right where I wanted him. The sun did not rise over the Ethelgard Manor the following morning. Instead, the charcoal darkness of the storm simply diluted into a bruised, oppressive gray. The blizzard had not relented. If anything, it had intensified, burying the world in white silence. We were completely cut off. The roads were gone. The power lines were groaning under the weight of the ice, though our backup generators hummed with a reassuring, expensive consistency. I stood at the entrance of the conservatory, our breakfast salon. It was a masterpiece of glass and wrought iron, designed to make guests feel as though they were dining inside a snow globe. Safe and warm, while the elements raged inches away. The air smelled of freshly ground Arabica beans, buttered croissants, and wealth. I had dressed for battle. I wore a tailored cream suit that highlighted the severity of my posture, paired with blood-red heels that clicked against the mosaic floor with the rhythm of a ticking clock. My makeup was flawless, a porcelain mask that hid the woman who had not slept for a single second. I scanned the room. It was easy to spot them. They were seated at table 4, near the panoramic window. It was a cruel spot. The view was nothing but a wall of swirling white violence, a reminder that there was nowhere to run. Julian looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single night. His skin was the color of old parchment. There were dark, bruised circles under his eyes, and his hair, usually styled with obsessive precision, was disheveled. He was wearing the same sweater he had arrived in, likely because he had been too terrified to unpack. He was staring into his black coffee as if he hoped to drown in it. Sienna, by contrast, looked irritatingly fresh. She was wearing one of the hotel's plush white robes over her clothes, a breach of dress code I would normally correct, but today I let it slide. She was buttering a piece of toast with gusto, chatting animatedly to a man who was clearly not listening. I began my rounds. I moved from table to table, the gracious hostess. I asked the elderly couple from Boston about their radiator. I recommended the Eggs Benedict to the tech CEO from Silicon Valley. I laughed at jokes I did not find funny. I was weaving a web of normalcy, inching closer and closer to table 4. I saw Julian's body tense up before he even saw me. He felt my presence. It was a visceral reaction, like an animal sensing a predator in the tall grass. He stiffened, his hand freezing halfway to his cup. I glided up to their table. "Good morning," I said. My voice was bright, cheerful, and loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. Julian jumped, his hand jerked, and his coffee cup rattled violently against the saucer, spilling a dark brown stain onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh dear," I said, signaling to a busboy with a snap of my fingers. "Let us get that cleaned up. Nerves a bit frayed by the storm. Mr. Thorne?" Julian looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. He looked terrified. He looked at me and saw the executioner holding the axe. Sienna looked up, wiping crumbs from her lip. "Oh, hello again. The intense manager lady." "Lucia," I corrected gently, flashing a smile that was all teeth. "Please, call me Lucia. I trust you slept well? The storm can be quite loud at that altitude." "It was okay," Sienna shrugged. "The wind was crazy, but the bed? Oh my God. That bed is amazing. It is like sleeping on a cloud." Julian passed out the second his head hit the pillow. "Did you not, baby?" Julian flinched at the nickname. He could not look at me. He was staring at the spreading coffee stain as if it were a Rorschach test of his guilt. "I am so glad to hear that," I said. Resting my hand on the back of Julian's empty chair, I leaned in slightly. "I selected those mattresses myself. They are hand-stuffed with horsehair and cashmere, imported from Sweden. I chose them specifically for resilience. I wanted to ensure that couples celebrating special occasions would have the perfect foundation for their memories." I saw Julian's jaw muscle twitch. He knew. He knew that I had spent 3 weeks obsessing over those mattresses when we were renovating, telling him how I wanted our guests to feel the same comfort we felt in our own home. "Well, it is super comfy," Sienna said. Oblivious to the subtext, she reached for her glass of orange juice, and the light caught the diamond on her finger. It was a solitaire, round cut, set in platinum. It was flashy, it was large, and I had paid for it. "My goodness," I gasped, acting the part of the impressed observer. "That is a magnificent ring, Miss Vane," Sienna beamed. She extended her hand, wiggling her fingers to catch the light. "Thank you. Julian gave it to me for our anniversary. Isn't it just everything?" I took her hand in mine. Her skin was soft, uncalloused by work or worry. I examined the ring with the eye of an appraiser. "It certainly is," I said. "Platinum setting, looks like at least 2 carats, and the clarity that must be a VVS1. You rarely see that kind of brilliance in a commercial piece." I looked directly at Julian. He was sweating now. Beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead despite the chill of the window. "A ring like this," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, "must have cost a fortune. I would estimate $12,500. Perhaps purchased from a high-end jeweler on Fifth Avenue, maybe around Valentine's Day." Julian stopped breathing. I had quoted the exact price and date from the credit card statement I had reviewed last night. He looked at me with sheer horror. He realized then that I did not just know about the affair. I knew about the money. I knew everything. Sienna pulled her hand back, looking a little confused by my specificity. "I do not know the price," she giggled nervously. "Julian says it is rude to ask. But yeah, he has great taste." "He certainly has expensive taste," I agreed. I stood up straight, smoothing my jacket. "Well, since you are celebrating such a significant milestone, 2 years is a long time to keep a commitment. I want to offer you something special." I snapped my fingers again. The sommelier, who had been briefed beforehand, stepped forward, holding a bottle of wine. It was not just any wine. It was a bottle of Chateau Margaux, vintage 2010. Compliments of the house, I announced. Julian stared at the bottle. His face turned from pale to a sickly green. That bottle was from his private collection. We had bought a case of it on our honeymoon in France. We had made a pact to open one bottle every 5 years on our anniversary. He had obviously brought a bottle with him to share with Sienna, thinking I would never know. Or perhaps he had simply forgotten the significance, which was worse. But this bottle was not the one he brought. This was one I had pulled from the hotel cellar, charged to his account at a markup of 400%. But it is breakfast, Sienna said, eyeing the heavy red wine. It is never too early to celebrate love, I said. Enjoy it. It has a very complex finish, notes of berries, oak, and betrayal, or perhaps that is just my palate. Lucia! Julian stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing looks from the nearby tables. I need to speak with you. I am right here, Mr. Thorne, I said, not moving an inch. Privately, he hissed. He reached out to grab my elbow. I stepped back with the grace of a matador evading a clumsy bull. I am afraid that is not possible. Sir, I am currently on duty. I have a hotel to run and hundreds of guests to attend to. Please, he begged. His voice was cracking. Just 5 minutes. In your office. Anywhere. If you have a complaint about the service, you are welcome to file a formal report at the concierge desk, I said, my voice rising just enough so the Silicon Valley CEO at the next table could hear. Otherwise, I must ask you to respect my workspace. We pride ourselves on professional boundaries here at Ethelgard. Boundaries? Julian laughed. A frantic, hysterical sound. Are you kidding me? Lucia, stop this. Stop what? Mr. Thorne? I asked, my face a mask of innocent confusion. I am simply ensuring you have a memorable stay. Is that not what you wanted? A private, exclusive experience? I turned to Sienna, who was looking at Julian with growing alarm. Enjoy the wine, Miss Vane, and do try the brioche. It is to die for. I turned on my heel and walked away. I could feel Julian's eyes boring into my back. I could hear him whispering furiously to Sienna, trying to explain away his outburst. I walked out of the restaurant, through the lobby, and into the elevator. I did not look back. The moment the elevator doors closed, the smile dropped from my face like a stone. I returned to my glass office. The storm was still raging, but inside, the air was still and cold. My private investigator, a man named Cole who operated out of a basement in Chicago and charged $500 an hour, had sent a new encrypted file while I was at breakfast. I sat down and opened it. It was a medical report. I had asked Cole to dig into Sienna Vane's background. I wanted to know who she was, where she came from, if she had a criminal record. I expected to find credit card debt, perhaps a few unpaid parking tickets. I did not expect this. The file contained a scan of a sonogram dated 2 weeks ago. Patient: Sienna Vane. Gestation: 12 weeks. Estimated due date: August 4th, 26. I stared at the grainy black and white image on the screen. A tiny gray blob, a heartbeat, a child. The world tilted on its axis. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. This changed everything. Julian was not just having a midlife crisis. He was not just chasing youth. He was building a family. We had tried to have children for 3 years. We had tried. We had gone to specialists. We had endured the injections, the cycles of hope and crushing disappointment. The doctors had told us it was unexplained infertility, a polite way of saying that fate simply did not want us to be parents. Julian had held me while I cried. He had told me it didn't matter, that we were enough for each other. He had lied. It did matter. It mattered so much that he had gone out and found a 22-year-old fertile vessel to replace me. The embezzlement made perfect sense now. He wasn't stealing for luxury. He was stealing for a nest egg. He was stealing to support a child he was having with another woman. He was taking the money my father had left me, money that would have gone to our children, and giving it to his bastard. The pain I had felt the night before was a dull ache compared to the razor-sharp agony that sliced through me now. This was not just betrayal. This was biological warfare. I looked at the sonogram again. I felt a strange detachment. I did not hate the child. The child was innocent. But the father? The father was a monster. And the mother? Sienna was not just a clueless girl anymore. She was carrying the future Julian had denied me. She was the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. I closed the file. My hand moved to the phone. I dialed the kitchen. "This is Mrs. Ravenscroft," I said. "Yes, ma'am?" The executive chef answered. "For the dinner tonight at the Zenith," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Make sure the menu is pregnancy safe, no raw fish, no unpasteurized cheese, and have a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling cider prepared for the lady." "Of course. Mrs. Ravenscroft, does the guest have an allergy?" "No," I said. "Just a condition. And chef?" "Yes." "Make sure the steak for the gentleman is rare, very rare. Bloody." "Understood." I hung up. I walked to the window and looked out at the whiteout conditions. Julian was trapped here with his pregnant mistress, thinking his biggest problem was a credit card bill and an angry wife. He had no idea. He had no idea that I knew about the baby. He wanted a new life? He wanted a fresh start? I would make sure that by the time he left this mountain, he would not have enough money to buy a pack of diapers. I would strip him of his reputation, his career, his freedom, and his assets. He would be a father. Yes, but he would be a father behind bars. I touched the cold glass. "Congratulations. Julian," I whispered. "It's a boy." The storm howled in response, a mournful, angry sound that matched the screaming in my soul. The breakfast was over. Now it was time for lunch. And I was starving. The Ethelgard Manor was no longer just a building of stone and timber. Under my direction, it had transformed into a living organism, a predatory beast that breathed in rhythm with my own respiration. I was its central nervous system, and Julian Thorne was the pathogen I was systematically isolating before the final purge. The blizzard outside had sealed the exits, turning the hotel into a sealed pressure cooker, and I had my hand firmly on the heat dial. By early afternoon, the cabin fever had set in. Confined to the hotel by the whiteout conditions, Julian and Sienna ventured out of their suite, seeking distraction in the retail promenade on the ground floor. I watched them on the monitors in my office, tracking their movement like a hunter tracking wounded game. They entered the Gilded Cage, our exclusive luxury boutique that sold everything from designer handbags to Swiss watches. Sienna was bored. I could see it in the slump of her shoulders and the way she dragged her feet. She picked up a handbag, a limited edition clutch made of ostrich leather, priced at $8,500. She posed with it in the mirror, turning to Julian with that expectant, pouty look that had likely cost him a fortune over the last 2 years. Julian nodded, eager to please, eager to buy her silence and her affection. He pulled out his wallet. He produced a black credit card. Not the corporate one this time, but his personal card, the one he thought was safe. I picked up the phone on my desk and dialed the boutique's extension. The manager, a woman named Elena, who had been with my family for 20 years, answered on the first ring. "Decline it," I said. 2 words. Simple, devastating. "Understood, Mrs. Ravenscroft," Elena whispered. I watched the screen. Julian handed over the card. Elena swiped it. She waited a beat, then frowned, looking at the register screen. She swiped it again. "I am sorry, sir," Elena said, her voice perfectly audible through the surveillance feed. "The transaction has been declined, the system says. Refer to issuer." Julian laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "That is impossible. There is a $50,000 limit on that card. Try it again." "I have tried twice. Sir, it is a hard decline." Sienna dropped the bag onto the counter. The thud was heavy. "Seriously, Julian? Again? First the weird breakfast, now this?" It is the storm, Julian stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. The satellite links must be down. It is a technical glitch. He pulled out another card, a Visa. I tapped a key on my keyboard. My forensic accounting team had already flagged all his accounts for suspicious activity based on the large transfers to the Cayman Islands. The freeze was total. Elena swiped the second card. Declined, sir. Julian's face went from pale to a deep, flushed red. He was being humiliated in front of his trophy mistress by a shopgirl. Let me call the bank, he snapped, snatching the card back. He pulled out his cell phone. He dialed. I watched as he held the phone to his ear. Waiting. And waiting. He would be waiting a long time. I had instructed the hotel's telecommunications server to reroute all outgoing calls from the guest network that matched the toll-free numbers of major banks to a dead loop of hold music. He was not listening to a bank representative. He was listening to a recording of Vivaldi's Four Seasons that would never end. I cannot get through, he muttered, staring at the phone in disbelief. The lines are dead. You are unbelievable, Sienna hissed. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the shop, leaving him standing there holding his useless plastic rectangles. He looked around. Paranoid. He felt the walls closing in. He looked up at the security camera in the corner of the shop. He looked right at me. Run. Rabbit, I whispered. I switched my attention to the housekeeping department. It was time for phase 2. Maria, I spoke into my radio. Is the guest in 801 out of the room? Yes. Mrs. Ravenscroft. They just left for the shops. Execute Protocol Lilith, I ordered. Protocol Lilith. Copy that. It was a cruel instruction. Perhaps the cruelest thing I had ever done, but mercy had no place in this war. Julian's mother had died when he was 20. It was the defining trauma of his life. She had been obsessed with calla lilies, white, waxy, funereal calla lilies. The smell of them made Julian physically ill. He associated that cloying, sweet scent with morgues, with grief, with the darkest depression of his youth. When we got married, he had made me promise never to have a single calla lily in our house. I had ordered the florist to fill the Raven suite with them. 10 minutes later, I watched on the monitor as Julian returned to the room, chasing after a furious Sienna. He swiped his keycard. The door opened. He stepped inside and immediately froze. The room was filled with white flowers. There were vases of them on the mantel, on the bedside tables, on the coffee table. The suite looked like a wake. The scent must have been overpowering, a suffocating wave of death and memory. Julian staggered back, covering his mouth with his hand. He gagged. What is that smell? Sienna asked, wrinkling her nose. It smells like an old church. Get them out, Julian choked, his voice strangled. Get them out of here. They are just flowers. Julian, calm down. The hotel probably put them here as a nice gesture. They know, Julian whispered, his eyes wide and manic, darting around the room. She knows. She is doing this on purpose. Who? The manager lady? Sienna laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. She was looking at him like he was losing his mind. You think she looked up your flower phobia? You are being paranoid, baby. You are stressing me out. It is her, Julian shouted, grabbing a vase and hurling it against the wall. It shattered, water and white petals exploding across the silk wallpaper. Sienna screamed. Stop it! You are scaring me! But I was not done. I accessed the room's integrated audio system. I had uploaded a specific file to the server earlier that morning. It was La Vie en Rose, but not the original Edith Piaf version. It was the instrumental violin cover we had played for our first dance at our wedding, the song that was supposed to symbolize our eternal union. I set the volume to level 2, just loud enough to be heard in the quiet moments, but soft enough to be mistaken for imagination. The haunting melody began to drift through the hidden speakers in the ceiling. Julian froze amidst the shattered glass. His head snapped up. Do you hear that? He whispered. Hear what? Sienna asked. She was busy checking her nails, trying to ignore his outburst. The music. That song. I do not hear any music. Julian, it is just the wind. No, listen. He pointed at the ceiling. It is our song. She is playing our wedding song. Sienna listened. She frowned. I literally hear nothing, maybe a little humming from the heater. You are hearing things. Julian, you are having a breakdown. I smiled. The acoustic dampening in the suite was designed to be directional. I was piping the sound specifically to the speakers in the master bedroom and the bathroom, areas where Julian was pacing, while leaving the sitting area where Sienna was standing in relative silence. I am not crazy, Julian yelled, grabbing his hair. She is mocking me. He ran to the phone and dialed the front desk. Turn it off, he screamed into the receiver. Turn off the music. Music, sir? The receptionist replied, following the script I had given her. I show that the audio system in your room is currently switched off. Perhaps it is the storm playing tricks on you. Julian slammed the phone down. He looked at Sienna. She was backing away from him, clutching her coat. I am going to the spa, she said, her voice trembling. I cannot deal with this right now. You are acting like a lunatic. Sienna, wait. She slammed the door in his face. Julian was alone with the smell of his mother's funeral and the ghostly echo of the vows he had broken. He sank onto the floor, putting his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth. He stayed like that for an hour. Then, the anger overtook the fear. I saw him stand up. He washed his face. He smoothed his hair. He looked into the mirror and tried to summon the arrogant executive he used to be. He left the room. He did not take the guest elevator. He found the service stairwell. He was coming for me. I knew exactly where he would go. He knew the layout of the back-of-house areas from the times I had given him tours during construction. He was heading for the staff corridor that connected the kitchen to the executive offices. I left my office and went down to meet him. The corridor was long, lined with concrete and fluorescent lights that buzzed with a low, electric hum. It was cold here, stripped of the luxury of the guest areas. It was the skeleton of the beast. I stood in the middle of the hallway, waiting. The door at the far end burst open. Julian stormed in. When he saw me, he stopped dead. I stood with my hands clasped behind my back, motionless. He walked toward me. His stride was aggressive, but his eyes were pleading. Lucia, he said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Mr. Thorne, I replied, this is a restricted area. Guests are not permitted. Stop the act, he shouted, closing the distance between us. He stopped 3 feet away. He smelled of sweat and fear. Stop the cards. Stop the flowers. Stop the music. I know it is you. I have no idea what you are talking about, I said calmly. Perhaps the altitude is affecting your cognitive functions. Cognitive functions? He laughed bitterly. You are torturing me. Why? Because I brought her here? Is that it? You are jealous? He reached out and grabbed my shoulders. His grip was hard, desperate. Lucia, listen to me, he said, dropping his voice to that manipulative whisper he used so well. She means nothing. Sienna is just a fling, a distraction, the stress of the firm, the market. I lost my head. But it is you I love. You know that. We have history. We have a life. I looked at his hands on my blazer. I felt nothing but revulsion. Take your hands off me, I said. My voice was low, but it carried the authority of a whip crack. He flinched but did not let go. I can fix this. I will send her home. I will tell her it is over. We can work this out. Lucia, you and me, like always. Just unlock the accounts. Let me handle this. He was bargaining. He thought he could charm his way out of a felony. He thought he could erase a pregnancy and 2 years of betrayal with a few frantic promises in a hallway. I reached up and peeled his fingers off my shoulders. One by one. I held his hands for a second, feeling the tremors running through his bones. You are right, Julian, I said. His eyes lit up with hope. I am? We do have a history, I said, and history is written by the victors. I dropped his hands. I took a step back, creating a chasm between us. You have 24 hours, I said. What? Checkout is at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. You have 24 hours left in my hotel. I suggest you use them wisely, because once you step outside those doors, the storm will be the least of your problems. Lucia, please, enjoy your stay. Sir, I said. I turned and walked away. I did not run. I walked with the measured pace of a woman who has all the time in the world. He shouted my name, but I did not stop. I rounded the corner and disappeared, leaving him alone in the cold, gray light of the corridor. I returned to my office. It was time for the final twist of the knife before dinner. I opened the safe in my desk. Inside was a brown envelope. I had prepared it earlier, printing out the documents my private investigator had unearthed. It was not the evidence of the affair. Sienna knew about the affair. It was not the evidence of the baby. She knew about the baby. It was the truth about Julian's finances. Sienna Vane was a gold digger. That was her profession, and she was good at it. She was with Julian because she believed he was a titan of industry, a man with endless resources who could fund her lifestyle. Inside the envelope were his true credit scores, abysmal, his personal debt load, over $3 million even before the embezzlement, and the ownership papers of our penthouse and cars, all of which were in my name, or the name of the Ravenscroft Trust. Julian owned nothing. He was a pauper playing a prince. He was spending my money to keep her. I wrote a simple note on the outside of the envelope. For Miss Vane, a receipt for your services. I called a bellman. Deliver this to Suite 801, I instructed. Slip it under the door. Do not knock. Yes, ma'am. I sat back and watched the monitor. 20 minutes later, I saw the white corner of the envelope slide under the door of the Raven suite. Julian was in the bathroom, likely splashing more cold water on his face. Sienna was in the living room, painting her nails, still fuming about the bag. She saw the envelope. She frowned. She walked over and picked it up. I watched her open it. I watched her eyes scan the documents. I watched her expression shift from confusion to shock, and then to pure, unadulterated rage. She realized she had bet on a losing horse. She realized the diamonds, the trips, the furs. They were all stolen. She was not the girlfriend of a millionaire. She was the accomplice of a broke thief. The bathroom door opened. Julian walked out, looking exhausted. Sienna, She threw the papers in his face. The audio feed picked up the sound of the papers hitting him. You are broke? She screamed. You are broke? Who is Lucia Ravenscroft? Why is her name on everything? Why is her name on the deed to the penthouse you said was yours? Sienna, let me explain. You lied to me. You said you were the CEO. You are just an employee. You are spending her money on me? It is complicated. It is tax stuff. It is not tax stuff, Julian. It is debt. You are $3 million in debt. And I am pregnant with your baby? How are you going to pay for this kid? With coupons? The screaming intensified. Objects were thrown. The alliance of the sinners was crumbling. They were turning on each other, tearing each other apart with the jagged edges of their own greed. I turned down the volume on the speakers. I did not need to hear the rest. The music of their destruction was sweet enough. I looked at the clock. It was 5 p.m. The dinner was at 7. The main course was yet to be served. The blizzard broke at noon, not with a whimper, but with a sudden, violent clearing of the sky that left the world blindingly white. The wind died down just enough to allow the rotors of a Sikorsky S-76 helicopter to slice through the thin mountain air. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive conference room, watching the black insect descend onto the helipad. It kicked up a vortex of snow, a chaotic ballet that mirrored the storm I was about to unleash inside the hotel. Marcus Vance had arrived. He did not come alone. As the helicopter doors opened, 2 associates in dark overcoats stepped out, clutching reinforced briefcases. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of soldiers. Marcus followed, his cashmere coat whipping around his legs. even from this distance. I could see the set of his jaw. He was not here to negotiate. He was here to conquer. 10 minutes later, my conference room had been transformed into a war room. The mahogany table was buried under stacks of files, architectural blueprints of Julian's financial deceit. The air smelled of fresh coffee and impending litigation. "You were right," Marcus said. Bypassing the pleasantries, he threw a heavy file onto the table. It landed with a thud that sounded like a judge's gavel. "It is worse than we thought. The embezzlement from the venture fund is just the tip of the iceberg. We are looking at tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering." I picked up the file. My hands were steady. "How much, Marcus?" "Total misappropriation is nearing $4 million, he said. "But that is not the worst of it." He opened a second folder. This one marked with a red tab. He pulled out a document and slid it across the polished wood. It was a mortgage deed. "Recognize this?" he asked. I looked at the paper. It was a loan agreement for $2 million, secured against the Ethelgard Seaglass estate, my private villa in the Hamptons. My grandmother had left that house to me. It was my sanctuary. It was the one place on earth I had never taken Julian, wanting to keep it solely for myself. I looked at the signature line. There, in a jagged, hesitant hand that tried desperately to mimic my own elegant script, was the name Lucia Ravenscroft. "He mortgaged my house," I whispered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "He forged my signature and mortgaged my property 6 months ago," Marcus confirmed. "He used a notary in Jersey City who has since lost his license for malpractice. The money was wired to a shell account in the Cayman Islands, the same one you identified last night. He is not just stealing from the company, Lucia. He is stealing your identity, under New York penal law. This is forgery in the 2nd degree and grand larceny in the 1st degree." I ran my finger over the ink of the forged signature. It was a violation so intimate, so profound, that it eclipsed the infidelity. Sleeping with another woman was a betrayal of the heart. Forging my name was a betrayal of my existence. He had tried to erase me, to use my name to fund his escape from me. "I do not just want a divorce, Marcus," I said. My voice was quiet, terrifyingly so. "I do not want a settlement. I do not want him to just walk away with a slap on the wrist." Marcus nodded. He knew this look. "What do you want?" "I want him destroyed," I said. "I want criminal prosecution. I want him to lose his license. I want his assets seized. I want him to leave this hotel and go directly to a federal holding cell. I want him to look at a prison wall and know that I put him there." "Then we stop playing defense," Marcus said, pulling a fountain pen from his pocket. "We go nuclear. I have drafted the affidavit. I have the forensic accountant's report. I have the contact at the district attorney's office on speed dial. But to make the fraud charges stick without a lengthy trial, we need one thing." "What?" "Intent," Marcus said. "We need proof that he intended to flee. We need proof that he knew exactly what he was doing with that offshore account. If he claims it was bad investment advice or a clerical error, a good lawyer might get him a plea deal. We need a confession." The intercom on the table buzzed. "Mrs. Ravenscroft?" It was the front desk manager. "I am in a meeting," I snapped. "I apologize, ma'am, but Miss Vane is here. She is at the desk. She is demanding to see you. She is hysterical, ma'am." I looked at Marcus. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "Speak of the devil," I said, "and the devil's advocate appears." "Send her to the blue parlor," I instructed the manager. "I will be there in 2 minutes." I stood up. "Marcus, keep working on the indictment. I am going to get your confession." The blue parlor was a small, intimate waiting room off the main lobby, decorated in velvet and silk. It was designed for tea and quiet conversation. Today, it was the setting for a surrender. When I entered, Sienna Vane was pacing the rug. She looked like a ruin. The glamorous girl in the fox fur coat was gone. In her place was a terrified child. Her eyes were swollen and red. her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She was clutching the envelope I had sent her, the bank statements, like a shield. When she saw me, she stopped. She trembled. "Is it true?" she asked. Her voice was raw, stripped of all its previous arrogance. She threw the envelope onto the coffee table. The papers fanned out, revealing the red ink of Julian's debts. "Is all of this true?" I closed the door behind me. I did not sit. I stood tall, imposing, blocking the exit. "My forensic accountants do not make mistakes. Miss Vane," I said coolly, "Julian Thorne has a net worth of -$3 million. The car you drove here in, leased in my name, the apartment you have been visiting him at, owned by my trust, the jewelry you are wearing, bought with stolen corporate funds." Sienna let out a sob. A wet, ugly sound. She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "He told me he was the owner. He told me he was divorcing you because you were crazy. He promised me we would go to Italy. He said he had millions put away." "He lied," I said. "That is what he does. He is a parasite. Sienna, he finds a host, drains them dry, and moves on. I was the host for 5 years. You were supposed to be the next one, but unfortunately for you, the host he picked this time was already empty." She looked up at me, her face blotchy with fear. "I am pregnant," she whispered. "Did you know? I am having his baby." "I know," I said. I offered no congratulations. I offered no pity. "And that makes your situation significantly more precarious." "What do you mean?" I took a step closer. "You are not just a mistress anymore. Sienna, you are an accomplice." Her eyes went wide. "What? No, I did not know, I swear." "It does not matter what you knew," I lied smoothly. "It matters what the law sees. You have been the recipient of gifts totaling over $200,000 in the last year, gifts purchased with embezzled funds. You have traveled on flights paid for with stolen money. You are currently staying in a hotel suite booked with a fraudulent credit card. In the eyes of the prosecutor, you are holding the loot. That makes you a co-conspirator in a RICO case, possession of stolen property, wire fraud, conspiracy. Can I go to jail?" she stammered. "For 5 to 10 years, I said, checking my watch. "Depending on the judge, and since you are carrying his child, the jury will likely see you as the primary beneficiary of his crimes. They will think you put him up to it." Sienna hyperventilated. She clutched her stomach. The reality of her life was collapsing. She was 22, pregnant, broke, and facing prison. "Please," she begged, sliding off the sofa to her knees. It was a pathetic sight. "Please, Mrs. Ravenscroft, Lucia, I did not know. He tricked me too. I thought he loved me. I do not want to go to jail. I cannot have my baby in jail." I looked down at her. This was the woman who had smirked at me in the lobby yesterday. This was the woman who was wearing my scarf. "Stand up," I commanded. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "I have no interest in sending a pregnant woman to prison," I said. "My war is not with you. You are just collateral damage, a foolish girl who got caught in a bear trap meant for a wolf." "I will do anything," she cried. "Just tell me what to do. I will leave him. I will testify. I will do whatever you want." "You want immunity?" I asked. Yes, please." "Then you have to earn it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a digital voice recorder. It was small, black, and unobtrusive. "Tonight," I said, holding the device out to her, "you are going to dinner with him, the proposal dinner. You are going to act like everything is fine. You are going to tell him that you forgive him for the declined cards. You are going to tell him that you love him." I can't." "You will," I hissed. "If you want to stay out of a cell, you will be the best actress in the world. And then, when he is comfortable, when he thinks he has won you back, I want you to ask him about the plan. Ask him where the money is. Ask him how he's going to pay for your life together. Get him to admit that he has the money hidden. Get him to say the words, Sienna stared at the recorder. Her hand shook as she reached out and took it. It was heavy with the weight of her betrayal. "Record it," I said, "and bring it to me before the dessert is served. Do that, and I will have my lawyer draft a non-prosecution agreement for you. You will walk away free. You will not get a dime of my money, but you will keep your freedom." "And Julian?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Julian is already dead," I said. "He just hasn't stopped moving yet." Sienna nodded. She slipped the recorder into her pocket. She looked at me one last time, a mix of fear and awe in her eyes. She realized, perhaps for the first time, the magnitude of the mistake she had made in crossing me. "Go," I said. "Fix your face, put on your dress, and do not disappoint me." She fled the room. I stood there for a moment in the silence. I felt a strange hollowness. It was not joy. It was the cold satisfaction of an equation balanced. I walked back to the conference room. Marcus looked up from his papers. "Well?" he asked. "We have a witness," I said, sitting down at the head of the table. "And by tonight, we will have a confession on tape." Marcus whistled low. "Remind me never to get on your bad side. Lucia." "Too late," I said, picking up the pen. "Draft the criminal complaint, Marcus, include the mortgage fraud, include the tax evasion, and add a charge for emotional distress, just to be petty. The police?" "The FBI is already in the area for the storm relief," Marcus said. "I have arranged for a couple of agents to be in the lobby at 9 o'clock. They are expecting a high-value white-collar caller." "Perfect," I said. The trap was not just set, the jaws were open, the teeth were sharpened, and the bait was walking right into it. The dinner tonight was titled, "The Proposal." Julian thought he was going to ask a question. He had no idea that the only question tonight would be asked by a federal agent, and the answer would determine how many years he spent in a 6x8 cell. I looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of blood orange and violet. The storm was over. The reckoning had begun. The winter gala was a tradition at the Ethelgard Manor, a glittering spectacle designed to distract our high-net-worth guests from the harsh reality of the Vermont winter. Tonight, however, the atmosphere in the Zenith Ballroom was charged with a different kind of electricity. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt heavy, but inside, the air was vibrating with the hum of string quartets, the clink of baccarat crystal, and the murmurs of billionaires trapped in a snow globe. Because I had severed all room service operations to the Raven Suite, citing a mechanical failure in the dumbwaiter system, Julian and Sienna had no choice. Hunger is a primal motivator, even for the desperate. At 8 o'clock, they descended from their tower. I watched them enter from the shadows of the mezzanine. Julian was wearing his tuxedo, but it hung loosely on his frame. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His tie was slightly askew, and his eyes darted around the room with the frantic energy of a cornered rat. He had already started drinking before he arrived. I could tell by the slight unsteadiness in his gait. Sienna walked beside him, pale and rigid, clutching her clutch bag as if it contained a bomb, which, in a way, it did. The voice recorder I had given her was tucked safely inside. They were seated at a table near the back, far from the warmth of the fireplace but perfectly positioned for my line of sight. It was the shame corner, usually reserved for last-minute bookings, but tonight it was the center of my target range. I waited until everyone was seated. I waited until the first course, a delicate lobster bisque, was served. Then I made my entrance. I did not walk in. I descended. I came down the grand marble staircase wearing a gown of onyx silk that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It was strapless, structured like armor, with a train that flowed behind me like a shadow. I wore no jewelry except for my wedding ring, which glinted like a diamond-encrusted shackle on my finger. My hair was swept up, exposing the long, severe line of my neck. The conversation in the room lulled. Heads turned. I felt their eyes on me, judging, admiring, assessing. I was the hostess, the queen of this frozen kingdom, and I walked with the absolute certainty of a woman who owns the ground beneath her feet. I moved through the room, greeting key investors and guests. I stopped at the table of Arthur Henderson, the 70-year-old chairman of a massive hedge fund and one of Julian's biggest potential targets for his new venture. "Lucia," Arthur rumbled, standing to kiss my cheek. "Marvelous evening, though I must say, your husband seems under the weather." I glanced toward table 19. Julian was downing a glass of amber liquid, scotch, neat, double, in one swallow. He was not eating. He was staring at the tablecloth, sweating. "The altitude can be difficult for some constitutions. Arthur," I said smoothly. "Julian has always been fragile under pressure." I made my way to the stage. The spotlight hit me, blindingly white. I adjusted the microphone stand. The feedback whine was non-existent. My audio engineers were the best in the business. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice was low, resonant, filling the cavernous space without effort. "Welcome to the Ethelgard Winter Gala. I know the storm has kept us all captive a little longer than intended, but as the old saying goes, adversity reveals true character." I paused. I looked directly at table 19. Julian looked up. His eyes met mine across the sea of candlelit tables. He looked terrified. He looked hateful. "Tonight," I continued, "we celebrate not just luxury, but legacy. Ethelgard was built on trust, the trust you place in us to keep your secrets, the trust you place in the mountain to hold us up, and the trust we place in those closest to us." I signaled to the tech booth, the massive projection screen behind me, which had been displaying a loop of snowy landscapes and hotel branding, flickered. "In business, as in marriage," I said, pacing slowly across the stage, "transparency is key. We believe that what is said in the dark eventually comes to light, sometimes sooner than we expect." The screen behind me changed. It was not a landscape. It was a slide, a high-resolution screenshot of a text message conversation. The font was large enough for everyone in the room to read. "Sender, Julian Thorne. Recipient, Sienna Vane. Date, December 14th, 25. Message: just had dinner with that old dinosaur Henderson. God, he is boring. He rambled for 2 hours about his grandkids. I just nodded and smiled. As soon as I get his check for the fund, we are booking the trip to Capri. He is so senile he will never notice the management fees." A ripple went through the room. It started as a confused murmur and quickly swelled into a gasp. Arthur Henderson, sitting in the front row, froze. He put down his wine glass. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple. I pretended not to notice. I kept speaking, my voice steady. "Investment is a promise that we are building something real, something lasting." The slide changed. Another screenshot. "Sender, Julian Thorne. Message: the board at Ravenscroft is a joke. Lucia has no clue I am bleeding the accounts. She thinks I am working late. Stupid cow. I will have the shell company fully funded by spring, and then we disappear." The gasp turned into an uproar. People were pointing. Chairs scraped as guests turned to look at Julian. Julian sat frozen. He was staring at the screen, his mouth open in a silent scream of disbelief. His brain could not comprehend what was happening. He was seeing his private malice, his secret arrogance, projected on a 20-foot screen for the very people he had mocked to see. "What the hell is this?" someone shouted from the back. Julian snapped. The alcohol, the fear, and the sudden, violent public stripping of his mask combined to shatter whatever restraint he had left. He leaped from his chair, knocking it backward with a crash. "No!" he screamed. It was a raw, animal sound. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" He ran toward the stage. He stumbled, catching his foot on a table leg, sending glasses and silverware crashing to the floor, but he scrambled back up. He was wild-eyed, his face slick with sweat, his tuxedo jacket flapping open. "She is lying!" he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is faking it! That is fake. She is crazy. I did not move. I did not flinch. I stood in the spotlight, calm as a statue, watching him unravel. It is a deep fake, Julian yelled, reaching the stairs of the stage. He scrambled up, stumbling on the steps. She is trying to frame me. She is obsessed with me. Tell them, Lucia, tell them you are insane. He lunged for the microphone. Before his hand could touch the metal stand, two shadows materialized from the wings of the stage. My head of security, a former Navy SEAL named Garrett, moved with terrifying speed. He did not strike Julian. He simply intercepted him. He grabbed Julian's arm in a lock that looked gentle, but was actually immobilizing. "Sir," Garrett said, his voice calm and low, "you need to step down." "Get off me," Julian thrashed, spitting saliva. "Do you see what she is doing? She hacked my phone. She is a criminal." The crowd was silent now, watching the spectacle with a mix of horror and fascination. This was better than any opera. This was the raw disintegration of a human being. Julian looked out at the crowd. He saw Arthur Henderson standing up, looking at him with pure disgust. He saw the faces of the investors he had courted, now hardened into masks of contempt. "Arthur," Julian pleaded, struggling against Garrett's grip. "Arthur, it is a joke. It is out of context. I never said that." "Get him out of my sight," Henderson growled, his voice carrying clearly across the room. Garrett tightened his grip. "Let us go. Mr. Thorne, do not make this harder." Julian turned back to me. We were only 3 feet apart. He looked at me, searching for some crack in the armor, some sign of the wife who used to forgive him. He found nothing. He found a stranger in a black dress. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" I leaned into the microphone. The entire room heard my answer. "I am simply sharing our annual report. Mr. Thorne," I said, "numbers do not lie, and apparently, neither do text messages." I nodded to Garrett. Garrett and a second guard dragged Julian backward. He kicked and screamed, shouting profanities, calling me a witch, a monster, a whore. His voice echoed off the high ceilings, growing fainter as they hauled him toward the exit doors. Sienna was still sitting at table 19. She had not moved. She had not looked up. She was staring at her hands, trying to make herself invisible. She knew that if she moved, if she defended him, she would be dragged down with him. She chose survival. The doors slammed shut, cutting off Julian's screams. The room was dead silent. I took a deep breath. I smoothed the silk of my dress. I looked out at the stunned audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice soft, apologetic, and perfectly controlled. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for that unfortunate interruption. It appears one of our guests had a severe adverse reaction to the open bar. We take the privacy and dignity of our clients very seriously, and we will ensure he receives the appropriate medical attention." I signaled to the conductor of the orchestra. "Please," I said, smiling warmly, "do not let the foolishness of one man ruin a beautiful evening. The filet mignon is excellent tonight." The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra swelled into a lush, vibrant waltz. The tension broke. Conversations resumed. Hesitant at first, then louder, fueled by the adrenaline of the drama they had just witnessed. I walked off the stage. Garrett was waiting for me in the hallway. He was adjusting his cufflinks. "He is in the holding room, Mrs. Ravenscroft," Garrett said. "He is vomiting. He is a mess. Do you want us to hand him over to the sheriff? The deputies are in the lobby." I paused. I listened to the music drifting from the ballroom. "No," I said. Garrett looked surprised. "No?" "Not yet," I said. "If we arrest him now, he goes to a cell, he gets a lawyer, he gets to sleep it off. What do you want to do?" "Take him back to the Raven suite," I ordered. "Throw him back in the room. Let him sit there. Let him sober up. Let him realize that he has lost the investors. lost his reputation, and lost his dignity. He might trash the room, ma'am. Let him, I said. I will add it to the bill. Just make sure the door is locked from the outside. And Garrett? Yes, ma'am? Cut the power to the suite. No lights, no heat, just the cold and the dark. He likes isolation? Give him the real thing. Understood. I walked back toward the ballroom. The night was still young. I had a dinner to finish, and I had a pregnant mistress to debrief. Julian Thorne was currently sitting in the dark, freezing, humiliated, and waiting for the police. But waiting is the hardest part, and I wanted him to wait a little longer. I slipped back into the party, picking up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. The walk from the ballroom to the control room was a journey between two worlds. Behind me, the orchestra was playing a Strauss waltz, a desperate attempt to plaster over the cracks of social decorum that Julian had just shattered with a sledgehammer. Ahead of me lay the cold, silent reality of surveillance. I did not run. I did not rush. I moved with the inevitability of a glacier. I entered the security command center. It was a windowless bunker filled with the hum of cooling fans and the blue glow of 30 monitors. My head of security, Garrett, was already there, standing with his arms crossed, watching the feed from Suite 801. Status, I said, taking my seat at the main console. We deposited the package, Mrs. Ravenscroft, Garrett reported. He is in the room. He is agitated. I looked at the screen. The high-definition camera, equipped with night vision, painted the Raven suite in ghostly shades of green and gray. The power was still cut. Save for the emergency track lighting I had graciously allowed to remain active, it cast long, distorted shadows against the walls, turning the luxurious suite into a dungeon. Julian was not alone. Sienna Vane was there. She had returned to the room immediately after the gala, fleeing the public humiliation like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. But she was not crying on the bed. She was not waiting for him to comfort her. She was packing, on the screen. I watched Julian stumble into the room. He looked like a man who had gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight champion. His tuxedo shirt was torn open, his tie gone, his hair a matted mess of sweat and desperation. He saw Sienna throwing clothes into her suitcase. The expensive Louis Vuitton trunk I knew for a fact he had bought with the company card 3 months ago. "What are you doing?" Julian's voice came through the audio feed, slurred and thick with rage. "Where do you think you are going?" Sienna did not look up. She shoved a silk dress into the bag with violence. "I am leaving, Julian. The roads are clearing. I called a car service. I am getting out of this hellhole." "You are leaving me?" Julian laughed. A sound that was more of a bark. He staggered toward her. "After what she just did to me? You are supposed to be on my side. We are a team." Sienna spun around. In the low light, her face was a mask of contempt. The fear I had seen in the blue parlor was gone, replaced by the cold, hard instinct of self-preservation. "There is no team. Julian," she spat. "There never was. There was just you, lying to everyone, lying to her, lying to the investors, and lying to me." "I did it for us," Julian shouted, grabbing her arm. "Do not touch me," Sienna shrieked, shoving him back. He was so unsteady on his feet that he stumbled and fell against the wall. "You did it for yourself. You told me you were rich. You told me you were the king of the castle, but you are nothing. You are a broke, pathetic fraud who stole his wife's money to buy me dinner." Julian stared at her, his chest heaving. The betrayal was cutting through the alcohol haze. "You ungrateful little—" "Save it," Sienna cut him off. She zipped up the suitcase. "And do not think I am going down with you. I spoke to Lucia." The name hung in the air like a curse. "You spoke to her?" Julian whispered. "I did more than speak to her," Sienna said. Picking up her coat, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small black voice recorder I had given her. She held it up. The tiny red light was not blinking, but the weight of it was immense. I gave her everything. Julian, the recordings, The texts you sent me about the offshore accounts, the plans to flee to Italy. She has it all. Julian's face went slack. You wore a wire? You recorded me? She offered me a deal, Sienna said coldly. Immunity. I have a baby to think about. I am not going to prison for your midlife crisis. She walked past him toward the door. Julian lunged. He did not grab her. He grabbed the vase of white calla lilies, the ones I had placed there to torment him, and hurled it at the wall next to her head. The porcelain exploded. Water and flowers rained down on the carpet. Sienna screamed and ran out the door, abandoning her second suitcase. I heard her footsteps retreating down the hallway, running toward the elevator, running toward the freedom I had promised her. Julian did not chase her. He stood in the center of the room, vibrating with a kinetic energy that was purely destructive. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with violence. Then, he snapped. It was not a slow burn. It was an eruption. He grabbed the 60-inch OLED television mounted on the wall. With a primal roar, he ripped it from its brackets. The metal groaned and snapped. He threw the screen onto the floor and stomped on it, shattering the glass into 1,000 spider webs. I watched from the control room. I did not flinch. I reached for my notepad. Item 1, I said aloud to Garrett, my voice devoid of emotion. Television, 60-inch, $4,000, plus installation fees. Julian moved to the bar. He swept his arm across the marble counter, sending rows of crystal glasses and premium liquor bottles crashing to the floor. The smell of alcohol must have been overpowering. Item 2, I noted, writing steadily. Bar stock and glassware. Estimated value, $3,500. He tore the curtains from the windows. He overturned the coffee table. He picked up a chair and smashed it against the mirror I had watched him in so many times. Every blow was a scream of impotence. He was trying to destroy the room because he could not destroy me. He was trying to break the hotel. But the hotel was made of stone and steel. He was only breaking himself. I continued my inventory. Antique mirror, French, 19th century, $12,000. Silk upholstery, custom weave, $8,000. He destroyed the room for 10 minutes. It was a tantrum of biblical proportions. When he was done, the Raven Suite was a ruin. The floor was covered in glass, water, alcohol, and feathers from the pillows he had ripped apart. Julian collapsed in the center of the debris. He fell to his knees, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. He put his head in his hands and sobbed. It was a loud, ugly sound, the sound of a man who realizes that the walls have not just closed in, they have crushed him. The door to the control room opened. Marcus Vance walked in. He was holding a file folder, his face grim. "It is done," Marcus said. "The federal warrant was signed 10 minutes ago. The FBI agents are in the lobby. The Economic Crimes Unit is securing the perimeter." "What are the charges?" I asked, not looking away from the screen. "Wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, money laundering, and thanks to the recording Miss Vane just handed over, conspiracy to commit flight to avoid prosecution." Marcus paused. "They are ready to go up and get him." I looked at Julian on the screen. He was curled into a ball, shaking. "No," I said. Marcus frowned. "Lucia, do not take chances. He is violent. You saw what he just did to that room." "He has exhausted himself," I said. Standing up, I smoothed my skirt. "He is not a lion anymore, Marcus. He is just a frightened dog." "You do not need to do this," Garrett interjected. Stepping forward, "Let the pros handle it. I need to do this," I said. "I need him to see me. I need him to know that it was not the police, or the FBI, or bad luck that finished him. I need him to know it was me." I turned to Garrett. "You are with me. Stay close, but do not intervene unless he touches me." "Yes, ma'am." I walked out of the control room. The elevator ride up to the 8th floor was silent. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I felt no fear. I felt only a cold, crystalline clarity. We reached the door of the Raven suite. It was slightly ajar, the lock broken from when Sienna had fled. I pushed it open. The devastation was absolute. The room looked like a war zone. In the dim emergency light, the broken glass glittered like diamonds in the dust. The air smelled of lilies and scotch, the scent of a funeral held in a distillery. Julian was still on the floor. He heard the door open. He lifted his head. When he saw me, he did not rage. He did not scream. He simply deflated. "Lucia," he croaked. His voice was a wreck, shredded by screaming. I stepped into the room, my heels crunching on the broken glass. I stopped 5 feet away from him. Garrett stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel. "Look at this," I said, gesturing to the chaos around us. "I suppose I should thank you. I was planning to remodel this suite next season anyway. You have saved me the demolition costs." Julian dragged himself to his knees. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and swollen. He looked pathetic. He reached a hand out toward me, a hand that was cut and bleeding from the glass. "Lucia, please," he sobbed. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I lost my mind. The pressure, the stress, I did not know what I was doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing," I said. "You knew when you forged my signature on the mortgage. You knew when you wired $3 million to the Cayman Islands. You knew when you brought your pregnant mistress into my home." He flinched at the mention of the pregnancy. "She trapped me," he stammered, falling back on the oldest lie in the book. "Sienna is manipulative. She seduced me. Lucia, I was weak. I admit it, but I love you. You are my wife. We can fix this. I will go to therapy. I will pay it back. I swear." I looked down at him. I tried to find a spark of the man I had married, the man I had loved, but there was nothing, just a hollow shell filled with greed and cowardice. "You cannot pay it back, Julian," I said, "because you have nothing. You are bankrupt. Your assets are frozen. Your reputation is ash." I raised my left hand. I looked at the platinum band on my finger, the symbol of my vows, the circle of eternity. I slid it off. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with 5 years of lies. "You want to know what this is worth?" I asked, holding the ring up. "To me, it is worth nothing. It is just metal, cold, hard, and empty, just like you." I tossed the ring. It hit him in the chest. It bounced off his stained tuxedo shirt and landed in the pile of wet, broken glass with a meaningless clink. "Keep it," I said. "You might be able to trade it for a pack of cigarettes in the commissary." Julian froze. "Commissary? You did not think I came up here just to chat, did you?" I asked. "I came to deliver the checkout notice." I took a step closer, looming over him. "There are federal agents in the lobby. Julian, they have a warrant for your arrest. The charges are extensive. My lawyer tells me that with the evidence we have, including Sienna's testimony, you are looking at 20 years, minimum." The color drained from his face completely. "No," he whispered. "No, you would not. I am your husband." "Not anymore," I said. "Now, you are just inmate number whatever the Bureau assigns you." The shock on his face morphed into something else, something darker. The panic gave way to the cornered animal aggression I had seen earlier. He scrambled to his feet. He was shaking, but his eyes were wild. "You bitch," he hissed. "You set me up. You planned this whole thing." "I simply allowed you to be yourself," I replied calmly. "You did the rest." "I will not let you destroy me," he screamed. "I will take you down with me. I will tell them everything. I will ruin this hotel." "You have no credibility. Julian, you are a thief and a liar." He let out a roar and lunged. He moved faster than I expected, fueled by the adrenaline of the doomed. His hands were reaching for my throat, his face twisted into a rictus of hate. "I will kill you," he shrieked. I did not move. I did not need to. Garrett moved. It was a blur of motion. 1 second Julian was flying toward me. The next, he was face down in the broken glass, Garrett's knee pressed firmly into the small of his back. Julian howled in pain as his arm was twisted up behind him. "Stay down," Garrett barked. I looked down at my husband, pinned to the floor like a butterfly on a mounting board. He was thrashing, spitting blood and saliva onto the carpet, cursing my name. I stepped closer, careful not to get blood on my shoes. "That is assault," I noted coldly. "Add it to the list. Garrett?" "Yes, ma'am." "Get him up," I ordered. "The police are waiting. I do not want to keep them." Garrett hauled Julian to his feet. He was limp now. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the crushing reality of his fate. He hung in Garrett's grip, weeping softly. "Why?" he whispered again, looking at me through his swollen eyes. "Why did you have to be so cruel?" I looked at him, and for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of emotion. It was not pity. It was closure. "Because, Julian," I said, my voice soft but echoing in the ruined room, "you broke my heart, but you made the mistake of trying to break my bank account. I can forgive a broken heart, but I never forgive bad business." I turned to the door. "Take him away," I said. Garrett shoved him forward. Julian stumbled out into the hallway, his weeping echoing off the walls. I stayed in the room for a moment longer. I looked around at the destruction, the broken TV, the shattered mirrors, the dying lilies. It was a mess, but it was a mess I could clean up. I walked to the window and looked out. The storm had passed. The moon was out, shining cold and bright on the snow-covered mountains. The world was clean again. I took a deep breath of the freezing air coming through the broken window pane. It smelled like winter. It smelled like silence. It smelled like freedom. The piercing shriek of the fire alarm shattered the silence of the corridor. A dissonant scream that signaled the final act of this tragedy had begun. It was not a drill. In his blind, drunken rage earlier, Julian had not just torn down the heavy velvet curtains, he had tossed them onto a floor lamp. The heat of the bulb igniting the silk and dust. The smoke had finally curled up to the sensors, and now, the Ethelgard Manor was reacting with the violent efficiency of a fortress under siege. I stood in the hallway, watching as the emergency strobe lights began to pulse, painting the walls in blinding flashes of white and darkness. Inside the Raven Suite, the overhead sprinklers roared to life. It was not a gentle mist. It was a torrential downpour of icy, pressurized water designed to suppress an inferno. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" The shout came from the stairwell. A team of 6 tactical officers, led by the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit, swarmed into the hallway. They moved with the heavy, kinetic precision of a hammer striking an anvil. They did not care about the luxury of the hotel or the pedigree of the guest. To them, this was just a takedown. They pushed past me and Garrett, storming into the flooded suite. I watched from the doorway, shielded by Garrett's broad frame. The scene inside was biblical in its chaos. The water hammered down, soaking the plush carpet, the ruined furniture, and the man cowering in the center of the room. Julian was on his knees, his hands over his head, screaming incoherently as the freezing water drenched his tuxedo, plastering the expensive fabric to his shivering skin. He looked like a drowned rat, stripped of all dignity, shivering violently in the deluge. Sienna Vane, who had been intercepted by an officer near the elevators and brought back to the scene, was pressed into the corner of the room. Her hair was plastered to her skull, her makeup streaming down her face in black rivers. She was trembling, clutching her stomach, her eyes wide with terror as she watched the father of her unborn child being treated like a dangerous animal. "Julian Thorne!" the lead agent bellowed over the roar of the water and the siren. "I have a warrant for your arrest." Julian looked up, blinking against the spray. "I am innocent," he sputtered, choking on water. "It is a mistake. Call my lawyer. Call my wife." "You have the right to remain silent," the agent shouted, grabbing Julian's wrist and twisting it behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs was audible even over the chaos. It was a sound of finality. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Lucia! Julian screamed my name, a desperate plea that turned into a gurgle as he was hauled to his feet. Help me! Tell them who I am! I did not step forward. I did not speak. I simply watched as they read out the laundry list of his sins. You are under arrest for 18 counts of wire fraud, the agent recited, his voice flat and professional. Embezzlement of corporate funds, aggravated identity theft, second-degree forgery, money laundering, and malicious destruction of private property. Julian sagged in their grip. The weight of the words seemed to break his spine. He looked at Sienna, hoping for an ally, but she turned her face away, refusing to meet his eyes. She chose survival. She chose the deal I had offered. Get him out of here, the agent commanded. They dragged him out of the room. He was slipping on the wet carpet, his Italian loafers finding no traction. He was dead weight, a sack of wet laundry being hauled to the trash. As they passed me in the hallway, Julian looked at me. His eyes were wild, rimmed with red, filled with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. You did this, he hissed, spitting water at my feet. You planned this. I merely facilitated it, I replied, my voice dry and cool in the humid hallway. You executed it, Julian, masterfully. We began the procession. It was a long walk from the 8th floor to the lobby. I walked behind the police escort, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. A funeral march for my marriage. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, the grand lobby was a sea of people. The fire alarm had forced every guest out of their rooms and into the main gathering space. Hundreds of people, investors, celebrities, socialites, were standing there in their pajamas and fur coats, murmuring in confusion. The sight of the police brought a sudden, shocked silence to the crowd. Then, they saw him. They saw Julian Thorne, the man who had toasted them just hours ago, the man who had pretended to be a titan of industry. He was soaked to the bone, shivering, handcuffed, and flanked by federal agents. The murmurs turned into a roar of whispers. Phones were raised. Flashes went off. This was the end of his social life. In the age of social media, his humiliation was being broadcast globally in real time. Julian saw the cameras. He saw the faces of the people he had tried to impress. He saw Arthur Henderson shaking his head in disgust. He snapped. He stopped walking, planting his feet and fighting against the agents. Look at her, Julian screamed, his voice tearing through the lobby, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. He thrust his head toward me. She is the devil. She set me up. She is a cold-hearted witch. She ruined me. The agents shoved him forward, but he kept screaming, twisting his head back to look at me. You will rot in hell, Lucia, he bellowed. You will die alone in this ice castle. You have no heart. You are not a woman. You are a machine. I stopped at the top of the grand marble staircase. I stood 6 feet above him. I looked down at the spectacle. I did not look angry. I did not look sad. I looked bored. I rested my hand on the banister. I tilted my head slightly to the side, as if observing a noisy child throwing a tantrum in a supermarket. Take him away. Officers, I said. My voice was not loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the lobby, it carried to every corner. He is disturbing the guests. Julian let out one last, wordless howl of rage as they shoved him through the revolving doors and into the biting cold of the night. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers reflected off the snow, painting the lobby in a strobe of violence. Sienna followed a moment later. She was not in handcuffs, but she was flanked by 2 officers. They were taking her in for a voluntary statement. As she passed the stairs, she stopped. She looked up at me. Her face was pale, her eyes haunted. She placed a hand protectively over her stomach. She knew she had come within inches of losing her freedom. She knew that I held her fate in my hands. She nodded. It was a small, jerky motion, a gesture of submission, a gesture of gratitude. I did not nod back. I simply watched her go, She was a loose end that had been tied off. She was no longer my concern. The heavy doors swung shut. The sirens wailed, fading into the distance as the convoy drove away, taking the trash down the mountain. The silence returned to the lobby. The guests were staring at me. They were waiting for a reaction. They were waiting for the grieving wife. The hysterical victim. I felt a presence at my elbow. It was Marcus Vance. He looked impeccable, untouched by the chaos. He held out a document folder. "He signed it," Marcus said quietly. "When?" I asked, taking the folder. "In the room," Marcus replied. "Right before the police came in. He thought if he signed the divorce papers, giving you full uncontested control of the assets, you would call off the FBI. He thought he could trade his signature for his freedom." "A foolish trade," I said, opening the folder. I looked at the signature. It was shaky, written in panic, but it was legally binding. Julian Thorne. "He did not read the fine print," Marcus noted with a dry smile. "The clause about spousal immunity does not apply to federal crimes initiated by a third party. You got the divorce, the assets, and the justice." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "Send the bill to the company and add a 50% bonus for efficiency." I closed the folder. I looked out at the crowd. The staff were looking at me, waiting for orders. The guests were looking at me, waiting for reassurance. I clapped my hands twice. The sound was sharp, decisive. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice projecting warmth and authority, "please accept my deepest apologies for the disturbance. The situation has been resolved. The fire alarm was a localized malfunction caused by a guest smoking in a non-smoking room." A few people chuckled nervously. "The danger has passed," I continued, descending the stairs with the grace of a queen returning to her throne. "The bar is open, the band is ready, and to apologize for the interruption, the champagne is on the house for the rest of the evening." A cheer went up. The tension evaporated. The band struck up a jazz number, upbeat and lively. Corks popped. The rich and powerful went back to their drinking, their gossiping, and their partying. The tragedy of Julian Thorne was already forgotten, replaced by the promise of free alcohol. I walked through the crowd. I did not stop to chat. I walked straight to the front desk. The lobby was returning to its pristine state. The porters were already mopping up the melted snow near the entrance. The illusion of perfection was being restored. I stopped at the reception counter. I placed my hand on the cool marble, right where Julian had dropped his credit card 24 hours ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. I looked at the vase of white calla lilies sitting on the corner of the desk. They were perfect, pristine, waxen, the flower of death, and the flower of rebirth. I reached out and adjusted one stem, turning it slightly so it caught the light of the chandelier. I looked at the empty space where Julian had stood. I could almost see his ghost there, arrogant, handsome, and doomed. I could see the smile he gave me when he thought he had won. I could see the terror in his eyes when he realized he had lost. A small smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a job well done. It was the smile of a general surveying a conquered battlefield. "Hope you enjoyed your stay, sir," I whispered to the empty air. I paused, savoring the silence that sat beneath the music. "Checkout complete," I murmured. I turned on my heel. I walked across the marble floor, my reflection moving with me like a dark twin. I reached the door of my office. I stepped inside. I did not look back. I slammed the heavy door shut. The lock clicked into place with the sound of a pistol cocking. The screen went black. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope the chilling revenge of Lucia Ravenscroft gave you the satisfaction you were looking for. I am curious to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a cozy bedroom in London, a bustling cafe in New York, or perhaps somewhere quiet in Vietnam? Please leave a comment below and let me know. I love reading about where our community is growing. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel Sweet Rose Drama, hitting that like button, and smashing the hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world to me. Until next time.